everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex, and this is my channel Frank Fiction, where I talk about books and the book publishing industry. Today I have some good old-fashioned booktube content for you, where I'm going to tell you what I read in July. I read the most books in July than I have in any month this year at a whopping 4. Of those 4 books, 2 of them were completely new territory for me, and that territory is nonfiction. Specifically, autobiographies. Kicking it off, I have Pyramids by Terry Pratchett, and this is the story of Tepik, who is a young man set to inherit the kingdom of Jelly Baby, but he is not content to stay in a kingdom where nothing has changed for the last 7,000 years, so he decides to move to the city of Ankh-Morpork to join the Assassin's Guild. But unfortunately for him, immediately after he graduates from the Assassin's Guild, his father unexpectedly dies, and he's forced to return home to inherit the throne. This is the 7th book in the well-established Discworld series, and unfortunately it's also the first one that I've read that I am not comfortable giving 5 stars. One thing that I've learned from reading Terry Pratchett's novels is that pretty much all of them, except for maybe the first one because that was where he was kind of figuring things out, all of them have a moral, which is usually very easy to see because he's beating you over the head with it, but in a fun way. With this story, I felt like the jokes fell a bit flat, the puns weren't as good, and the moral was a little bit harder to decipher because originally I thought that it was a story about not following tradition, which is something that he's already done in another book. So then it felt to me that it was a story that, yeah, it had a different plot, but the theme was the same, and therefore it wasn't really new or original. Near the end of the story, I realized that it was less about how stifling tradition can be, and it's more about how change is inevitable despite our best efforts, which to me is a really good theme. I think that's a great moral and premise for a book, but the fact that I couldn't really tell that that's what it was about until the very end meant that it just wasn't as good to me. I definitely think based off of the ending that there are going to be more stories with Tepik and his camel, You Bastard. Yes, his camel is named You Bastard. And I do plan to read every single one of the 41 or 42 Discworld novels, so given the fact that this is only book 7, hopefully the next one with him in it is going to be even better. And my favorite parts of this book were definitely with the Assassin's Guild and Ankh-Morpork. Ankh-Morpork is just honestly the perfect city for anything to take place in. I think that that's probably just Terry Pratchett's crowning jewel of the universe that he's built. It's a great, wonderful place with all of these different guilds that are constantly competing with each other. But yeah, overall I would give this a rating of 4 stars. Up next, I have the very first autobiography that I ever read, which is a big deal because I actually enjoyed it, and that is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. Now, everybody has heard about this book, and I'm definitely behind the ball on reading it, so it's probably no surprise to you that I read this and liked this. You've probably read it as well, but just in case you haven't, it is a tell-all story about Jennette McCurdy's life of being a child actor and being forced to become a child actor by her mom, who was very emotionally abusive to her. So the story is told in parts of before her mom died and after her mom died, and how that had a lasting impact on her life. It's definitely a book that shows the lasting harm that the pressure parents put on their children can cause, even if in the end they achieve, success and financial stability. The book is also an intensely negative and reflective compiling of different snippets from her childhood and from the time after her mom's death. It made it hard to put the book down, but I also felt like I had to, just for a palate cleanser. I was reading this at the same time that I was reading Pyramids because I kind of wanted something fun compared to something that definitely is not fun. There is no joy in this book. I kept waiting and hoping that the ending of this story was going to show how she had worked through all of the trauma of her childhood and how she had found what had given her life meaning, but the truth is, I think Jennette McCurdy only being like 30 when this book was published, she's 31 right now. I think her being this young means that she hasn't really found that thing that has given her life purpose yet. She's still kind of figuring that out, but she felt like she needed to tell people about her experiences this far. And it makes me wonder if maybe later in life, once she has learned more and grown more and maybe figured out whatever that thing is that's going to give her meaning, if she'll want to write another book. And if she did, I think it would be very well received because she is a great author. She definitely knows how to tell a story. I so wanted to share like a positive experience with her, and I just didn't get that. I just really hope that she finds the thing that makes it where her trauma is no longer the defining feature of her life. And the fact that this was my first autobiography that I was reading, I also expected that that's what they were. I thought it was supposed to be that people tell kind of the negative parts about their life and then they end with saying like, but this is how I grew. This is how I figured out what my life meant. And this book helped me to realize that that's not necessarily what they are, and that's okay. And overall, I would give this 4 stars. All right, up next, I have Free Water by Amina Lukman Dawson, and I totally picked this book up on a whim when I was in Barnes & Noble based off of the cover and the awards that it had already won. I was seeing this as a hardback book that already had like the embossing on them, and I was like, I think that must be a really great story. This is the story of Homer and his sister Ada, who are 2 slave children born on a plantation who go and escape to try to find freedom. Unfortunately, in the process, their mother is captured, so they're forced to navigate the swamp and try to make their way north on their own. While they're wandering around in the swamp, they are found by a slave who managed to escape, and he takes them to a community in the swamp called Free Water. When Homer and Ada make it to the community, they meet other children, some of whom were former slaves like themselves, and others who were born free within Free Water, and who had never seen a white person in their life. Even though this is a middle grade novel, which places it in the age range of 8 to 12 years old, I would definitely say that Amina Lukman Dawson does not hold back in her brutal honesty of depicting the lives of slaves. She included the beatings, the whippings, how they were sold away from family, and ultimately how they weren't viewed as people. Now, obviously, some things were censored because Lukman Dawson isn't going to use the N-word in a children's story, but she did give them a disparaging name that the white slave owners use, and that term is darkies, which is objectively bad and harmful, so I think a child would easily be able to understand why that's wrong. I could easily see why this would be an impactful read for a child, and I think that it might be good for them to make something like this, or this book in particular, required reading in schools. I will note that there are multiple perspectives in this book, and most of them are black children, but there is one white child named Nora, and she is actually the daughter of the slave owner, the ones that own Homer and Ada. She's not demonized, but the author did use her ignorance about the slave's condition to show that things aren't always the way that we're taught, and also we have a lasting impact on the lives of other people. I would definitely say that this is a solid 5.5 stars. And lastly, I have the second autobiography that I read, which is Finding Me by Viola Davis. I read this at the same time that I read Free Water to kind of cleanse my palate between the 2 books. And honestly, I found that seems to work for me. Reading 1 fiction book and 1 nonfiction book, I think works better than me trying to read 2 fiction books at one time. I picked this up because I think Viola Davis is an incredible actress, but I remember so vividly seeing an interview with her where she was talking about times from her childhood that are included in this book and how traumatic and horrible they were. And I find it hard to reconcile when people come from a really dark and tragic and poverty-stricken background and how they can grow to become as successful. And you know, she's an award-winning actress and she's beautiful and she has all of these wonderful qualities, and you would never guess the life that she came from. I can honestly say that her childhood was filled with some of the worst trauma that I have ever heard of in real life or in fiction. You might not want to read this book if any of these topics bother you, but she suffered from sexual abuse, from violent physical abuse, from deep poverty, and of course the undercurrent of racism that really highlighted everything. Oh, and animal abuse as well. There are 3 different scenes in this book where animals die very horrible and tragic deaths, which was very hard for me in particular to read. So if you can't handle that, you've been warned. Her book differs from Jeanette McCurdy's in that, yes, there were many parts of this book that were difficult to read, especially when looking at her early childhood, but she also found joy and hope and healing. She talks about the changes that happened throughout her life and how she copes with what she dealt with as a child. It's also very important to note that she wrote this in her 50s and not in her 30s. She has the life experience to have taken the time to work through a lot of what she dealt with, unlike Jeanette McCurdy, who her trauma is very recent. The writing is also very sincere and authentic. I would say that it can be jumpy at times because it's not always written linearly, so perhaps you might not always like that. Her book feels like you are sitting down and having dinner with her and you look at her and say, "So Viola, tell me about your life." And she tells it to you. And we all know that when we are talking about our lives, sometimes we'll start talking about something and then we'll go off on a tangent and then we'll come back around, and it's kind of this beautiful looping of this is the story of her. I learned a lot about the struggles of not only being an actor or an actress, but also specifically being a dark-skinned Black actress, because there is a difference, as I found out in here, of being, you know, a lighter toned Black-skinned actress with more traditionally white, as she puts it, interchangeable features, and being somebody who looks Black. And I will fully admit that I was very ignorant about the struggles of being a Black actress. I mean, it makes sense, of course, when you're thinking about it, but I don't know that as a white woman I'd ever really taken the time to consider how their lives and their struggles would differ from other actors and actresses, because I had always just thought of it as acting as a struggle. So I've definitely had my eyes opened reading this book. I really appreciate this perspective that she has given me. I've also started watching How to Get Away with Murder with Keaton, because she talks about how that role changed her life, which I had heard of. It was something that was very heavily promoted, but I actually didn't realize that it was her, that she was the main lead. But I would give this a solid rating of 4.5 stars. And those are all of the books that I read in July, so thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you liked this video, I would really appreciate it if you go and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It means a lot. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.